Hello and welcome to the Wednesday webinar series with The Nest. My name is Hazel Ackland. I am one of the co-directors of The Nest Southwest. We are a community interest company based in Exeter in Devon, and our mission is to support women and girls through the major life transitions of menstruation, pregnancy, birth and the menopause. And we've been doing this series of Wednesday webinars looking at different aspects of pregnancy, birth and early parenting experiences, inviting people to come in and to give us a presentation followed by a live Q&A. And so the live Q&A will not be recorded and it won't be up here this evening, but I'm very pleased this evening to welcome Libby Clapham, hypnobirthing teacher, and who's going to talk to us tonight and give us an introduction to hypnobirthing. So handing over to you, Libby.
Hi, thank you very much, Hazel. And thank you to The Nest for asking me to come and talk about something of which I am completely passionate about, which is helping women to have the best possible birth for them. And hypnobirthing is a way I've found which I think really helps women to do that. So the passion extends to that, but primarily it's about helping women to get that really good birth, and babies too, because it's important for them. So I'll just give you a brief introduction to me. My first involvement with children came when, as with many women, when myself and my other half decided maybe it was time to have children. So I went and got a book on pregnancy. And when I finished reading it, I thought nobody in their right minds puts themselves through this voluntarily. There is not a cat in hell's chance I'm going to get pregnant. And then, of course, the next thing I knew, I was pregnant. So 9 months later, I was giving birth and asking how I could train to be an antenatal teacher for the National Childbirth Trust. So there's a bit of an about turn there. Although I knew very little about babies at that point, I had a steep learning curve. And then I trained to teach with the National Childbirth Trust and taught with them for many years. And then I moved on to be a homeopath, trained to be a homeopath. So natural follow on to work a lot with women who were pregnant, to be with some of them while they were giving birth. And then I added on hypnobirthing, hypnotherapy, and trained to be a hypnotherapist. I still really didn't know anything much about hypnobirthing at that point. It wasn't hugely well known. I had 2 children. I forgot to admit to say that right at the beginning. The first one arrived after a long labour by caesarean section, and the second one was a vaginal delivery, by which time I was teaching classes. So perhaps, some of what I'd learned the first time around actually stuck by then. And then my daughter gave birth to her first, and it was a kind of long and troubled labour, and I kind of thought there must be something more that she could do. She'd been to classes and so on. And people started asking me if I did hypnobirthing. And as I looked into it, I thought, this sounds really interesting, because when I was teaching, it always felt that there was something missing. I didn't know what it was. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but that felt like it was supplying that something that was missing. So I trained as a KG, Catherine Graves, hypnobirthing teacher, and eventually my daughter came to my classes for her second baby, which was a lovely home birth. She's now got 3 children, the youngest of which is 4. So that's kept me on my toes too. And since then, I've just really enjoyed teaching women how to give birth using hypnobirthing techniques, and found that it really does do what it says on the packet for most women, which is great. The other things about me is I like gardening, and which is just as well, since I've got quite a large garden attached to the house I'm living in at the moment. And so the odd gardening metaphor comes in occasionally. So let's think a little bit about what we're going to do with this webinar. The first thing I want to say is I can't actually teach you the whole hypnobirthing set of skills and techniques in a 1-hour webinar. So I hope you'll go away with some things you can try with an understanding of what it is and whether it's for you, and if you want to find out more about it and pursue it. I hope you will leave with some things you can do, but not the whole. Unfortunately, it won't be able to teach you the whole thing. Let's start off with what on earth hypnosis has to do with giving birth, because it's not one of those things you'd immediately associate the two together. I'm going to just share the screen with you. Hold on a moment, I seem to have, there we go. I'm just going to do a screen share, and then I just click the wrong button there. There we go. So you should be able to see just the screen saying hypnotherapy. So the first one, yes, I have. Right, okay, so I hope you can all see that. Hypnotherapy. Why do people come and see a hypnotherapist? Firstly, because one of the most common ones is because they have fears or phobias which they want to get rid of, and they're having trouble doing that. It's getting in the way of their life. Another one would be because they've got habits that they want to change and they're having difficulty doing that. And most people have heard about people going to a hypnotherapist because they want to give up smoking. It might be nail biting or a whole range of other things. And some people, it would be something to do with increasing their confidence. So maybe they've got a new job, or they've been promoted. Perhaps they need skills which they haven't got. They have to perhaps to do some public speaking. They don't feel very confident about it, or it might be social things. And then performance is another one, which of course is closely connected with confidence. So actors, athletes often use hypnobirthing techniques. So what do we mean by this thing we call trance? Some of you may have encountered hypnosis on the stage or the television, and there you generally see people doing some very weird things, running around like chickens or eating an onion and thinking it's an apple. That's slightly different from what we do in hypnotherapy, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. The thing that we call trance is actually a very deep sense of relaxation, and it's something we all do naturally every day when we're waking up in the morning and when we're going to sleep at night. And it's a state where you could be hearing nothing that's going on around you or hearing everything. So commonly someone might say, I don't think it can have worked because I couldn't hear anything. Somebody else might say, I don't think it can have worked because I could hear everything that was going on in the room. And both of those are part of that state of trance. It's that state for which can be anything from pretty much awake but very relaxed, right the way through to almost asleep but not quite, so not really very aware of what's going on. And most of you will be familiar with that range, that state. And it's when our brains have quietened down, or rational brains are quietening down. It's also a state in which we feel very relaxed. And it's a time when we can be very focused in a way that is not always so easy when we're fully awake. And that focus can be used in all sorts of ways. So before we go on any further, I want to just talk a little bit about our minds, which we have the conscious mind, the rational bit that does all our rational thinking, and that's just really the tiny tip of the iceberg. Underneath that, there's this part which is labeled the unconscious or the subconscious, or some people split it in two and say that they're different. I tend to use those two terms interchangeably. And this subconscious part of our minds is the part which has all our habits, all the routine things it takes care of, and it's got a record of all the experiences we've ever had. It'll be our experience of each situation, what we heard and saw and how we felt, which isn't necessarily what you might expect from a particular situation. So that all goes into our subconscious, and we're not always aware of it. Sometimes it's sort of locked up in a dusty filing cabinet. We don't know where the key is. So that's that understanding of the mind, thinking of that sort of thinking of it in those terms, perhaps is quite useful when we're talking about both hypnobirthing and giving birth and hypnotherapy. So just to sum that up, it's a library of everything that we've ever encountered, experienced. It's habits, it's the things that you do automatically while your mind's thinking about something else. So it might be driving a well-known route, perhaps to work or home, or it might be making a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. You probably do it while you're thinking about something else. And it's also the unconscious. Another thing to say about it is that it's quite slow to learn new things. So if you change your route to work, or the place where you work, or you move house, or you rearrange your kitchen, it's quite common to find yourself, for example, standing in front of where the kettle was with your mug in your hand and the tea bag in it, and suddenly find yourself there and think, what am I doing here? Oh yes, of course, I need to make a cup of tea. So what's happened is that your rational brain has had to intervene to take you to where the kettle now is. And then in time, your unconscious or your subconscious learns where the kettle is, and you don't have to think about it anymore, which is one of the reasons it's so tiring when we move house and everything is in a different place, because we're having to think hard about where it all is, whereas normally that would just be done routinely. So it takes quite a long time for the subconscious or unconscious mind to kind of learn things or to change habits, which is why people often find it difficult to drop habits like smoking, for example. Another thing to say about the unconscious is that it can override the conscious mind, the rational mind. So, for example, if someone's had a past nasty experience, which they didn't much enjoy, that can be stuck in their subconscious. And when they encounter perhaps a situation which reminds them of that, it can make them, for example, much more nervous than they would expect to be. A really obvious example of that is being afraid of spiders. That's me. I'm not particularly afraid of them now, although I wouldn't thank one for climbing all over me. And I'd probably brush it off very quickly. But once upon a time, I would have been frozen to the spot. And I can remember a situation where I was. And I stood there for some time thinking to myself, that spider cannot hurt me. And yet I could not, for a very long time, get myself to go past the spider. You can imagine all sorts of other things. Often we have something or other that makes us really unusually frightened. And even though our rational mind is telling us that the thing is fine, that it's not going to hurt us, whatever it is, it's very difficult to override it. So just hang on to those things, and we're going to come back to those in a moment. So what hypnotherapy is helping is it's helping people to reset those kind of automatic responses which come up from our subconscious and which we don't necessarily want, often fear-based. It also helps us to let go of the thoughts and ideas which are not helpful to us. So that might be somebody feeling that they're not particularly good at something, for example, or ideas about things that they're having to do during their everyday life. and to replace that with a different kind of outlook. And usually it's a much more positive outlook. So for example, in confidence, to replace a negative idea about their own self and what they're capable of with a positive idea of how they can cope with things and that they are capable of doing certain things. Again, you know, that's obvious, that's increasing their confidence, increasing how they, that positive way of thinking about themselves, knowing that they can do something. And it also helps people to improve their performance. Sometimes that's just about increasing their confidence, but it can also be about helping them to get out of the way of their subconscious doing what it knows how to do. So for example, athletes can embed in their self-conscious the subconscious, the best way of doing something, running a race or jumping hurdles or whatever it can be. A musician might have embedded in their subconscious the best way of playing a particular piece of music. And improving performance is sometimes about helping them to get out of their own way so they can allow their subconscious to actually go ahead and do what it knows how to do. So a bit of it is about getting out of our own way. I bet you're still wondering what this has got to do with birth. Another thing I want to say about hypnotherapy is it can't make you do anything you don't want to do. So coming back to that stage hypnosis, when you see somebody running around like a chicken or eating an onion and thinking it's an apple or whatever else it is they've been asked to do, those people have been chosen because they want to do that. You wouldn't catch me going up there to do that. I wouldn't be chosen. They would, if you know what to look for, you can see them doing little tests. Sometimes they get people up on the stage and then send some of them back. Sometimes they select them for the audience. If someone comes to me and says, I want to stop smoking, and I say to them, okay, what is it that's made you decide you want to give up smoking? And they say, well, I don't so much, but my partner really wants me to stop. Then I really have to say, so I'm sorry, I can't help you until you yourself want to give up smoking. The other thing is that I can't make somebody lose control. So I can't make anyone do anything they don't want to do, and I can't make them lose control. People do what they want to do. So how does this hypnotherapy get used in preparation for labour? The first thing to say is that trance is actually a very natural and normal part of giving birth. And some women will go spontaneously into trance at some point during their labour. And probably in the past, we all did. But we tend to spend most of our lives using our rational brains now, our rational thinking brains, that modern part of our brain. And it often gets in the way. And there are other things that also get in the way, which I'll talk about in a moment. So using hypnotherapy can help us to get into that very relaxed and focused state, which we call trance, so that we're focused on what's happening in our body. It's not about becoming unconscious. It's about being very focused on what's happening and also being very relaxed so that we can allow our bodies to do what they're designed to do. We also use words in quite a positive and deliberate way too, because words can be very important. They can be very important in how we think about things, and also because the unconscious thinks in a very simple way. It doesn't tend to recognize the negative. So if you say, don't do something, it's more likely that you'll remember the something, but not the don't. So for example, if you say to your partner first thing in the morning, don't forget the milk on your way back home tonight, they're quite likely to forget, because what their subconscious hears is forget the milk. So if you say to them, remember the milk, they're much more likely to remember. It doesn't always work, but it's quite a neat little thing. And you can say it to yourself too and try it out for yourself. You can say to yourself, remember something rather than don't forget. I mustn't forget that. So I must remember, much more likely to remember it. So that's one example of words. And words can be very powerful too, can't they? Somebody's saying, do you work or are you just a mother? The just makes all the difference, doesn't it? So looking out for words like that, those words which can get into our subconscious. Another one is, we don't let you, you're not allowed. Now that can be used with the intention of being comforting or to say, you know, don't worry about it. But what can actually happen when you hear those words is that without ever consciously thinking about it, you assume that you don't have a choice where you do. So looking out for those words can be really important, and starting to recognize when they're being used and to spot that you do actually have a choice quite often, and that they're being used with a different intention. Another thing which hypnotherapy uses is association, and that association is to help you get into that trance state quickly. So music, touch, could be touch or it could be stroking, other sounds, visual things, they're all what we call anchors. They're little things which remind us of that very relaxed state or being very confident and feeling okay about things. And we use those in hypnotherapy, in hypnobirthing, to help people to get back into that positive, confident state. For example, when they get into hospital or as the labour continues, or any time when that trance-like state has been disturbed and they need to get back into it again. So it's got lots of uses. So just before we go on to that, what have I left out? What have I not said? Yeah, so I think that sums up what hypnotherapy is about and why it has a part to play in labour. But let's talk a little bit more now about why we would need it. We're part of the family of mammals. So we're in the same family as cows, sheep, cats, dogs. And they tend to give birth quite painlessly and calmly and comfortably, as far as we can tell. So why is it that humans don't seem to do this? Why do we have this view of labour as being really quite a medical event? Well, to understand this a little bit more, what's happening, let's just have a look. I'm just going to stop the share for a moment. There we go. I'm just going to show you, hope you can see this. I've got this is my knitted uterus that my daughter made for me. She knits. I knit 3, take back 4. No good with knitting at all. So this is a knitted uterus, baby's inside. Here's the cervix. So very simply put, you have longitudinal muscles which are moving up and down here. And they're in a nice relaxed state during pregnancy. And then here you have circular muscles on the cervix, the opening to the uterus. And they stay tightly closed during pregnancy to keep the baby in. And then when labour starts, that has to open out. And that's what the first part of labour is about. So if you think about it, muscles tend to work by and large in pairs in our body. So my arm here, for example, I've got a muscle here and a muscle here that works together. So when my arm does that, this muscle here has shortened and contracted, and this muscle has relaxed. And when I do this, this muscle relaxes and lengthens again, and this one has shortened and contracted. And they do that. Okay. But if this muscle or this muscle goes into a spasm and doesn't let go, and there can be all sorts of reasons for that, when I try and move my arm in whichever direction it is, that's actually going to be quite painful, and it's going to be harder work. And sometimes we can, and sometimes we can't. It's the same with the muscles of the uterus. These longitudinal ones, once labor starts, start to shorten and contract. And what they're doing is they're opening up the cervix, but only if the cervix, if those circular muscles can start to relax and let go. So if they stay a bit tight, then it makes these longitudinal muscles have to work much harder. And it also means these are hanging on. It's a bit like they're not exactly in spasm, but they're not very keen on letting go. And that then leads to pain. And the more pain there is, you get into a cycle where that can make the person more fearful too of what's coming. Okay, so if it's going smoothly, these muscles are relaxing and these muscles are gradually shortening and contracting as the labor goes on. Okay, so in order for that to happen smoothly, the first thing that's happening is that the oxytocin is flowing to keep those contractions happening. And when our brains produce oxytocin, it also stimulates more endorphins than the body's natural painkillers to start being secreted. And so hopefully you get a smooth and easy labor. But for our bodies to be producing oxytocin, then we need to be in a familiar place. We need to be surrounded by the people that we feel really okay with. And we need the lights preferably to be dim, not too many strange noises or loud noises, to be somewhere where we feel really safe and relaxed. And that's when our bodies produce oxytocin most efficiently. But our bodies are actually programmed as though we're giving birth in the wild. It's something we've done for such a long time, and it's set up as though we were giving birth in much more primitive conditions than we are. So nature's set it up so that if we've found a safe place and that place no longer becomes safe, perhaps because some wild animal has appeared in the distance or a hostile tribesman from over the hill, it's going to enable us to get away. And it does that by our bodies producing adrenaline, and the adrenaline actually slowing down the labor. The way it does that is that it sends blood off away from the uterus. So there's less blood going to the muscles of the uterus, gets sent off around the body to the places that are going to need it to run away. And by doing that, it slows the labor down. So that enables us to get away. So traditionally, if a woman goes into hospital in labor, particularly if she's not in well-established labor, she finds that her contractions will slow down. They usually get going again once she's settled into her room and become a bit more familiar with everything. But sometimes it's a bit more rocky after that. And there can be all sorts of other reasons too why she's feeling uncomfortable or not at ease, or not sufficiently at ease. But as far as nature's concerned, it's slowing everything down so she can go back to wherever her safe place might be, which I guess would be probably, as far as nature's concerned, at home. It's not necessarily the safest place for all women, or the place that they plan. So you have this problem with adrenaline and with oxytocin. So what makes adrenaline flow these days? It's not going to be necessarily a wild animal or a hostile tribesman, but it could be a stranger. It could be a strange place. It can be just the act of moving during labor. And it can also be deep-rooted preconceptions and negative ideas about giving birth, which we've picked up over a lifetime. Because we've been interfering with birth for so long, we've started to get a cultural picture of birth as not being the safest thing to do, of being painful. We had a long period of encouraging women to give birth on their backs, which wasn't, for many women, the best way of giving birth. Lots of women are very uncomfortable in labour on their backs. And so they would go through a labour which was interfered with in a strange place where they were probably quite frightened. And really, we're talking about sort of Second World War onwards. And but also before that too, there was quite a bit of interference. And so gradually our experience of labour has become one which is really quite negative compared to how other mammals give birth. And it's become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So where do we pick up these messages? We pick them up from places like hearing our mothers perhaps talk about birth, other women in the family, media, films. A really nice, gentle birth is not really very dramatic. It goes on for a long time. It's very quiet. It's very unexciting, really, to watch. And so when it's depicted in films, it tends to be quite dramatic. You know, the first contraction, everyone's rushing around trying to get the person to hospital or whatever it might be. And she's probably doubled over and screaming already. So it's not very good view. And magazines and books and so on all tend to reinforce this. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because if we go into labour feeling frightened because of that sort of thing, it's a bit like me with a spider. Even though we might rationally know that this is a thing that that so many women have been going through for generations and generations, we still feel quite frightened about it. And that can come back to kind of bite us. It's a bit like, there's a garden analogy coming up here. It's a bit like weeding. You know, you have those surface weeds, which are quite easy to pull out. And that's the equivalent of telling you at a conscious level about how birth is, how it can be, the best way of going about it, being active, all those sorts of things. But then there are the deep-rooted weeds, the ones with long tap roots like dandelions. And if you just take off the flower or a few of the leaves, it comes back really quickly. You can take it off a little bit further down, just below the surface, take a bit longer to come back, but it does still come back. If we get them out really far down, it either takes a long time or it dies and doesn't come back at all. And one of the things that hypnobirthing is really good for is helping people to snap off those deep-rooted preconceptions about birth, so that when they go through labour, it doesn't spring back at them a bit like spiders in me, if that makes sense. So let's just look at a diagram in a minute, which just sums that up. I'm just going to share the screen again. Right, so just summing that up again, here you've got the different things which can contribute to labour not being as smooth as it could be. So first of all those things which we hear perhaps from childhood on, what we call early and ongoing programming. So that's the other women talking, the media, TV, films, all that. And then going around anti-clockwise, reinforcement under what's wrong with labour, reinforcement of cultural expectations. So you go to classes perhaps, and their expectation and the midwife's expectation is not necessarily of a very smooth, comfortable birth. And so almost without realizing it, sometimes that is reinforced in the language that's used and the expectations. It's not true of all of them, but it does tend to be around. And again, anticipation can be quite negative from other women. Lots of pregnant women experience other women coming up to them and telling them their horror stories of birth. It's probably cathartic for them, and they probably think they're warning you, but it's not very helpful. The vocabulary can often be very medicalized, and it can also be quite disempowering. And again, I'm thinking about things like, we don't let you, you're not allowed. That can be disempowering in that we subconsciously assume we don't have a choice, and so feel a bit out of control. That can happen. And then the birthing atmosphere. Most of us give birth in hospital, and it depends on your view of hospital. Some people, their experience of hospital is that it's a good, comforting place where they can get help, and that's really nice. But it's also often a place where people have experienced quite difficult situations. Perhaps they've known somebody who's been very ill there or died there. And we tend to associate hospitals with danger, with a difficult situation. And so going to hospital can, at a subconscious level, also make you feel like you're going in for something to happen which is a bit on the dodgy side. It's a bit like, you know, if we went into hospital for the first time we made love, or any time we made love, and we got kind of hooked up to machines and watched carefully and so on, it would kind of be a little bit off-putting, I think, for most people. And labour is not dissimilar. The physiology and the production of oxytocin are very similar. So that's, and then when you've got all these things coming in, of course, that, sorry, I can't resist the odd little gizmo on here, then that introduces fear or increases fear. And when our bodies are feeling fearful, then we start to produce adrenaline, we produce a bit less oxytocin, and it's that kind of cervix doesn't quite want to let go, and things start to get a bit like driving along with a handbrake on. So here we've got one which really sort of sums up what's happening in your body. So when we're in a place where we feel less than relaxed, our body produces a set of hormones called catecholamines, of which adrenaline is one, and they get us ready to either fight or to run away, on the assumption that we're in a place which isn't safest for giving birth. And this is deep in a primitive part of our minds, not in our rational brains. And the way that that then proceeds is that the blood with the oxygen and food which muscles need when they're working hard is partly redirected to other places, the places which are going to be involved in running away, like the arms and legs, the heart, the lungs, not the uterus. So then the arteries within the uterus constrict as part of this, they get narrower. And that means that the birthing muscles don't get as much oxygen, and the baby doesn't get quite as much oxygen. And then the birthing muscles start to constrict. So the circular fibers, which are keeping the cervix closed, start to tighten again. And then the baby's head is forced against tight muscle because probably the contractions are still going. And then pain is created, and the labor is extended, it's not working as efficiently, the cervix doesn't open as smoothly as it should, and so we get this failure to progress. And then medical intervention then of course gets introduced for the mother and the baby. It might be syntocinon to help the labor along or whatever else. And so you get this cycle of fear, which produces adrenaline, which then produces tension, which slows down the labour. The labour becomes more uncomfortable, and that in itself produces more fear. So it's breaking into that cycle, which we're trying to do. And there are lots of ways of doing it, but hypnobirthing is a really good way of helping to break into that and stop it. Okay. So just to sum up. So hypnobirthing is about bringing birth back to you and your family, for sure. It's also about having a birth which, however it happens, is as calm and quiet as it can be and as comfortable. And it's about reconnecting women with that instinctive knowledge which they have in that primitive part of their brains and in their bodies, which already know how to give birth. But because we live in a world where we use our rational brains so much, we often get a bit disconnected from it. It's there, we just need reconnecting, and hypnobirthing can be a really good way of helping that to happen. Partners can be integral to birth too, particularly with hypnobirthing, in helping to protect that space which keeps you in that trance place so you're not disturbed by other things, and helping to keep you, to get you into that very deeply relaxed place. I think it's really important that a class not just tells partners what they can do, but shows them how as well. So fear is the enemy, if you like, of natural birth. It's the thing that puts the handbrake on. And if we take out the fear and if we increase our confidence, makes birth something which is much more normal and then much more comfortable by and large. So fear of birth is something which has been learned by many of us all through our lives in lots of little subtle ways. And hypnobirthing helps you to unlearn it, and to unlearn it fast. So it helps our subconscious to unlearn that fear much more quickly. Okay, let's stop the share. There we go. What else have I not said? Okay. Well, I hope that's making sense, and I hope it's helping you to understand how hypnobirthing techniques can help that deep relaxation, using language, changing the way that your subconscious mind thinks about things, helping your conscious mind to quieten down so that you can let that deep primitive part of your mind actually get on with the job. And a good course will teach you a whole range of different ways to go into that deep relaxation that we call trance. And it will teach you those anchors, those shortcuts too, which you can get into. So you can get into it quickly when you need to. It helps you to rejig your beliefs and expectations at both a conscious and an unconscious level. And it also teaches you how to harness the power of your mind. If you think about it, your mind can have a huge effect on your body. Just think about how you react when you're watching a car chase in an exciting film, and your body physiologically starts to change as though you're in that car chase yourself quite often. And so we can do the same thing. We can harness the power of our mind to help the birth process rather than to get in its way. So that's the opposite of the fear thing. So I also promised you something to take away from this. One of the things that most classes teach is breathing, and hypnobirthing does that too. The KG method, which I teach in the Good Birth class, that teaches a very simple form of breathing, because it's really important that it's It's not something complicated, which gets you back into that rational thinking part of your brain. It's something you can do almost without thinking about. And that up breathing then, let's just try that out, is a deep breath up through your nose. So you have that feeling of going upwards, which is what your uterus is doing. It's pulling upwards. And then it's a long, slower breath out through your mouth. And at the same time, letting go of any tension that you're aware of right now. So let's just try that a moment. So just a long, slow breath up through your nose. And then an even longer, slower breath out through your mouth, like a sigh. And as you do that, just feel yourself relax. That sighing breath is a way of stimulating oxytocin, stimulating your mind to produce oxytocin. Think about when you've been in a tense situation and then you sigh and relax and let go a bit. It's just using that same mechanism. Yeah. So just once more, a long, slow breath up through your nose, thinking of that upward motion. And then a longer, slower breath, just relaxing and letting go of any tension, sighing that out through your mouth. So that's the sort of breathing that you would be using during that first part of labour, when those muscles of the uterus are pulling upwards and opening the cervix. There we go. So does it work? Just going to do another share with you. This is a study which was done in Wolverhampton, NHS area, and they looked at women who had been trained in hypnobirthing and those who hadn't, who were known as the general population. And if you can see that up here, the women who had normal deliveries, that was 64% of those who hadn't been trained, and 84% of those who had been trained in hypnobirthing. So that's quite a difference. And then if you look at the women who needed instrumental deliveries, 11% of the untrained mums needed instrumental deliveries. That would be forceps or ventouse to help the baby out. And of the people trained in hypnobirthing, that was 8%. So less of a difference, but it still made a difference. And then with cesareans, planned cesareans was 10% for the general population and 4% for those trained in hypnobirthing. And the emergency ones, the ones that were done during labour, which were unplanned, was 15% for most women, 4% for those who'd actually been trained in hypnobirthing. And the hypnobirthing results for the normal births included 10 diabetics, 16 inductions, 24 water births, 11 home births, and a set of twins. So they didn't cherry pick either. So they had quite a lot of things there which might have predisposed some issues. And yet they had that higher percentage of vaginal births. And I think it's important there to say, you know, there was a number of people who had inductions, and some of them had emergency or elective cesareans and used their hypnobirthing techniques. One of the things that I feel really sad about is when someone says to me, oh yes, I did some hypnobirthing, but then I had to have an induction or a cesarean or whatever else it might have been, and it all went out of the window. That's such a shame, because it's really important too to learn how to use those techniques to get a really calm, positive experience, even when we need some extra help, because it's about making sure that if it's at all possible, our bodies will have as good a chances as we can of having a straightforward vaginal delivery, but it's also about making it as good as it can be if we need some extra help, because nobody can guarantee you a straightforward birth. It's just making it as possible as we can. So I just got my eye on the clock a moment. Hazel, have we got time for a relaxation, or do you think not? Yeah, Okay, let's go for it then. So I thought I'd do a short relaxation with you. For those of you who are not familiar with it, make yourself comfortable, go with the flow. Don't worry about it. It doesn't really matter if your mind goes off on other things and doesn't think about it, doesn't hear what I'm saying. It's great if it does, doesn't matter if it doesn't. It's about you just relaxing and letting go. It's something that that gets easier with practice, but it's often a really nice thing to do. Okay, so just make yourselves as comfortable as you can. If you can be supported, that's great, but you don't have to be. Okay, I'm just going to add a bit of music to this. So we'll have that hopefully in the background as well. Okay, here we go. Can you all hear that? Hazel, can you hear that coming through? Jane, you can hear my voice. Affect your own emotions with their beauty. Your body and mind absorb their calmness and their fluidity as you sink down into gentle peace. And now see the butterflies separate into bands of colour and move away out of sight. And then, like a gentle cloud, see coming towards you the most beautiful purple cloud of butterflies, ranging in colour from a soft red to a gentle blue. And as the butterflies intermingle and pass around each other, experience the energy of that purple flowing softly around and through you, and bringing you confidence and trust, filling you with happiness and quiet, bringing you the peace of mind that will be with you throughout your pregnancy and your baby's birth, allowing you to trust your Hi, hope you're all back with us. So that really completes my talk on hypnobirthing. I hope you can take away from it some things which you can do. There's all sorts of ways of learning. You can go to a live class or a Zoom class. I teach both, other people teach both. Or you can even do an online course in your own time and space. You can read books about it, but do practice. Remember, there's all sorts of different aspects to learning hypnobirthing. And even without hypnobirthing, I hope you'll have some things which will be helpful to you in giving birth. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Libby. So wonderful and relaxing, really good. I'm yes, going to turn off the recording and we can open up the Q&A and hopefully see some of you again here. I think we're meeting next week on the 2nd, or maybe it's the week after. No, it's next week on the 2nd for a webinar about breastfeeding 101.